So look, first and foremost, thank you so much, Mikhail, for being here and agreeing to do this. This is a great opportunity to have a first-hand experience behind the scenes with you, your work, getting a deep dive into the new series. And thanks all MIC members for joining as well. It's a great community effort, so thanks for that. Before sort of passing on to you, do you want me to give you sort of high-level introduction notes and then pass on to you, Mikhail? Would you like me to do that?
Yes, that's fine. That's perfectly fine.
Okay, so look, for those that don't know, Mikhail comes very much from an architectural background, having studied architecture, and that DNA is very inherent in the design of the watches. And in particular, he has a fondness for Art Nouveau and the Art Deco periods. And before I butcher these names, I know that you took inspiration from particular architects like Victor Horta and Charles Edouard Jennery. So apologies for any French speakers if I screwed that.
Very good.
But look, it's so evident. I've seen pictures of their work, and how you've managed to incorporate that into a watch is not easy. And you know, you could talk for hours about how you came into watchmaking and what inspired you, but that's not why we are here. So that's why I'm offering these high-level notes. But I'm very keen on learning how the journey has progressed from those, you know, early days to where we are to present.
Okay.
So without further ado, let me pass over to you, and you can take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Omar. Let me see if I can also adjust the screen a little bit for the recording. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. I made a small presentation to show to you all, which is about the background of the brand. It's actually more, where's the inspiration coming from, what was the timeline, and what is the techniques we're working with, and then also a little bit about the newest models and the model we're working on for the future. So also an insight in what we're going to do. Looking into the future, I hope that all the people who are watching, will have good questions about that, because I will not show too much, but if you question, I might show more. Because I need to keep it a bit secret what we're doing right now. But a little bit behind about the background of the brand. So I studied architecture in Delft. It was my dream since I was 8 to become an architect, so that was the only option. Studied in Delft, and since my second year, we went to work also at an architectural firm. Two main things happened in that same year, actually: financial crisis and me buying an Omega pocket watch. So the financial crisis made that the atelier of the office where I worked declined from 52 employees to 5, among which I was one. So I saw the heavy impact of the financial crisis, plus the effects it had on the position of the architect. Everything which is beautiful then becomes very expensive. So you see that the architectural role gets cut out, basically. And I think that's still very active in current day practice. So that's very important in the background. Then through a housemate, I came into clothing, and with clothing came into watches. So I bought this Omega pocket watch. I didn't know the brand. I saw it and opened it up. Because, well, my father is a technician, so I need to see the techniques, and I fell in love, basically. I started collecting broken watches from eBay, started repairing them, and in this way, in a nutshell, I became a self-taught watchmaker. After several years, I thought, I have the skills to design a watch. I know what I like, and that's much found in architecture. Why not try it myself? And at that time, there was 2004, no, sorry, 2012, 3D printing became a hot topic in my faculty. So that was an inspiration to go to work with 3D printing and venture the possibilities of that technique. For the sake of shape, that's very important to say. So I will show, oh no, very in a nutshell after that. So I graduated 2016, had my first watch delivered at the same time, which was quite challenging to do it. And then decided I had to go all in because it was now or never. And hired an atelier in Delft, so in the town of my studies, put my mattress in the back and just see where it was going. In 2020, I had a publication by Timekeeper Kuwait, and I had a great order from them, bespoke series, and I had an interview with Wijko. So both parties I'm very thankful to because that really helped growing the business. And whereas everybody was in a very shitty state because of COVID, I actually had so much work I didn't know what to do anymore. And my girlfriend says, I'm fed up with you working so much. So I actually called friends who I knew from the Dutch team to ask if they wanted to participate. And from actually, Damian was the first one. You will see him very often in our social media. He's much more communicative than I am. And from January 2021, we were a team of 6. So by now we are 7 people. In the meantime, we set up trainings, etc., because we need to import skills and teach people skills in anglage, finishing of cases, but also movement components, development, etc., etc. So a lot of people have passed the review, and we're left with 7 at the moment. So that's in a nutshell. But I would like to show you. Oh, if I may, Omar, if I may share my screen.
Yes, please.
Oh, you need to, yeah, you need to allow me.
Oh, do I? Okay. Try that. Does that work?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
So I prepared 33 slides, so we'll try it very fast. If I go too fast, you can ask questions afterwards, okay? So what we do? I think the most important thing coming from my background is that inspired by architecture, and what I like in architecture is that I like three-dimensional experiences. So I tend to say that we are on a quest to create three-dimensional wrist art, and I say a quest because it's never ending. So it will always become better because there's always to improve, or there's new visions or improvements, new techniques, everything. And this is very much from my experiences with architecture, that I like that you enter a building, you see the space, but not fully, and you want to walk through it, and then you see a new space and you see new details, and so you really get overwhelmed by the creation. And of course, in a building that's a bigger scale, so if you enter a church or a mosque or like any monument, basically, which is proven successful over time, you will have this experience. Um, that is very difficult to capture in a watch, but this is exactly what I hope that we can do. So architecture on the wrist, and I will show 2 examples. There are many more, but this one is very important for me, and this is a detail of a building called Hotel Solvay in Brussels. It's made by an architect, Victor Horta, and he was one of the inventors of the Art Nouveau style. So Art Nouveau is the earliest modernist style, you could say. That means that the spaces are floating into each other on different levels, whereas in classicism everything is separated and square mostly. So that is important. And what is so impressive about this particular image is that you have curved stones, you have curved fences, and everything works together. And this actually is something you might not like by taste, but you can't deny that it's craftsmanship. And if you look at the door, for example, and you see the thin cast iron, oh no, sorry, iron, it's not cast, but forged iron um, details, you can tell that the architect actually knew what he could do with the material because he was already working at a blacksmith when he was 14 years old. And the same goes for the other details. So that's something which tells something about artistry and craftsmanship. Very inspiring and something which is very rare these days. And then continuing with modernist architecture, there you have Erosorine, which is one of the most beautiful modernist buildings I know in New York. And just the sweep there in that building, it's from 1966, but imagine the shape that it had at the time already. It was something unearthly, I think. And then you see the lines in there, which are from the casting. So you actually see how it's made with metal or like wooden panels into which the concrete is poured. The same is for the building on the right, which is a church. And it's actually also my place of pilgrimage, although I'm personally not religious. But this building is so impressive, and it's on my way to Switzerland. So I happen to go there every time I drive to Switzerland because it's so overwhelming and it never ceases to impress. And there is also something important, which I will tell later on. That's the nuances in finishing. So you have a very raw, heavy roof, which is then optically detached from the walls. So it's very exciting, and the walls are then nice, white plastered and clean. So this is important thing about my inspiration. Then talking about the ornament, the first building from Horta shows a lot of ornaments, and it's something which is nowadays something which is like an added decoration. Whereas I think that an ornament used to be a very symbolic aspect of a building. Look at a church or a mosque where you dive into the details and you see that everything is to emphasize the importance of that building. And at the same time, it shows the craftsmanship of the maker making that, because it's not just somebody making it. So a watch for me is the same. You tell your values through wearing a watch. It's very subtle but very important. So this is why my watches are named after the architectural ornament. So 3D printing, I told you how I came to that. 3D printing is, instead of removing material, you add material by sintering or laser melting, it's called. So you can, the whole way of building a structure is radically different than conventional. This creates opportunities for hollow shapes. So I was sketching and taking a classical watch, very Art Deco inspired, and hollowing the sides, for example. That was the first idea. And this is some of the first examples that we made. So you see the raw cases, very raw textures, and you see the supports which we needed to actually support the product during the manufacturing process, to support it, but also to emit the heat, so that the material doesn't get too hot and it doesn't bend. But you can imagine that this needs a lot of this to look finished. So I dived into 3D printing, got a raw product, and then I thought, okay, what's the next step? How is this going to be a watch? So I basically bought a Proxon, which is same as a little hand grinder basically, and started experimenting. So I had no experience with that, and just went away. And now one of our specialisms is to actually manually finish cases and components, because we had to train ourselves. In 2018, I made the first 3D printed solid gold watch in our offering, which was actually the first one which was really using the opportunities of the techniques by opening it up, etc. And I think that was a major step for us. And then Horologerie Bru. And then you mentioned, Omar, in the beginning, you mentioned something about the process and the developments within the company. And I think this was a very important thing. So the first watch, the Ornament 1, as you can see, is trying to be a very classical watch. And I'm saying trying to, because it can never be, because you have the hollowed sides with the coarse textures. So it's a little bit, if I refer back to those pieces, I think it was in a ambiguous phase of the brand. So like it's the first watch I made, and I wanted to create something which is classical, yet I was using a new technique. So there's something which is contrasting. And then people were also looking at very magnified photos, and they said, yeah, but the textures on the inside are very raw. Why would you use the technique? Because it's actually more expensive, takes a lot of work, it's not effective. And that comment was, of course, as a young maker, I became very insecure. But I also thought, okay, this is interesting because somebody says it is not effective in an industry which is totally not about efficiency. So this is interesting, right? So how can I emphasize that it's not about effectiveness, it's about art rather, and that's to take the same shape as the Ornament 1, and then leave it completely raw, except for a few lines to emphasize that it's done deliberately. So this is, I think, a very important moment, 2008, where I came up with a watch which is really brutalistic. Everything is heavy textured, and it was also the first step in the company where I said, okay, I'm going towards integrated design, which is always a dream for me as an architect. It has to work together, and I started finishing movement components also to get to the same contrast. So raw horlogerie brut is derived from Le Corbusier's raw concrete. To show the roughness of the process and the materials you're using in its purest form as parts of the aesthetics of the watch, or in this case, the watch. And here you can see an example which is largely magnified. You see brush textures and very coarse, well, on this scale, coarse printed lines. So this is the case of the deconstructed, and it's already made with a different technique which doesn't use the supports anymore, so we can talk about that later on. So movement finishing became some kind of an addiction, and this is a detail of the movement we made for the like it's still a base Passeur movement, but then fully decorated for the bronze version of the raw ornament back in 2021. So 2024, where are we now? So this is in terms of what are you going through in terms of process. I just did a podcast 2 days ago with Worn and Wound, and I was telling the same thing. So I think it's important for an independent to be totally transparent. So I decided that I will show my or our challenges also in the company, and that means that when I started this, it was a passion project. It still is. So you don't start from a business perspective. So you create the watches we developed, and it's a very artistic process. Then people come in, and you notice that actually the watches they are not profitable. Just to say that every watch takes twice as much hours as we expected. We really loved it, but it prevented us from freeing up capacity to move to new projects, which I dream about already for years. And it didn't give, how do you say that, like sufficient funds also to grow to new models. So that was a tough analysis. And it made me decide that we were to stop the two model lines we were offering, the Ornament 1 and the Raw. So this is the honest reason behind it. And I think that many brands actually in my position will encounter this exact same situation, because making a watch or making a series of watches and running a business is a very like building crafts, you're building skills, teaching people, and you have to be commercial, which is two things which are difficult to combine in a way. So I said, okay, we're going to cancel these models and we're going to reintroduce something which is radically different in terms of offering, but it's actually even more close to my design language, and that's the mainline Holthinrichs Watches. So the name is the same, and a branch which is called Holthinrichs Horology, and we just announced that last week. So I'll tell more about that. So it means that we will offer watches starting with the signature ornament, and signature is it's not only the signature which is on the dial, but it's the signature style that we want to introduce with the signature. And that's a very Art Nouveau, very spacious, fluid design language, which is something to be fully honest, I didn't dare a few years ago. Because it was, I think, in my opinion, it's so different that I think until now I wasn't ready to do something like that. So you can clearly see the inspiration going back to Serena, for example. And this is what we just launched. So the whole idea behind this line is that we create a watch which is beautiful in the first place, like a sculpture. It embraces the wrist, and it is much more scalable than our previous lines. And scalable, I mean with scalable is when we developed it in such a way that it's adaptable for multiple movements up to 30 millimeters. So it means we can do limited editions based on this exact model. It can absorb many dial variants, which we can make for well, bespoke or small groups or that. So it's really intended to be a model which will last for many years. That's again also why it's called the signature. It will be a signature model in all. And yeah, I think I think the looks are very pronounced, and I hope that the people will like it. And people might not like it actually, so that's for some, but I think it's super dynamic. And when drawing this product, I call it a product, which just sounds very distant, but when drawing this, I was still thinking I'm going to use 3D printing. So this is an important change also, which I'm going to explain. And that's why the lugs are detached from the case band. And I thought, okay, it's going to be printed, and we did some tests actually. And then we had some of the main conditions that we wanted for the watch is that it's more scalable. Two, it's also more affordable than our previous lines. So that means that we have to look towards our techniques in a way which is maybe more effective. So the lugs which are sticking out are actually better reachable by hand to finish it. So it's less complex to finish. It's still hand finished, but these details make it more exciting while also more effective. If I'm talking about efficiency. So that's one thing. Then actually, when the design was ready, we had a discussion internally, and we said, okay, let's try if we can actually CNC this, because it looks like it's a solid shape. Is it possible if we use a 5-axis CNC that we can actually mill it? And it turns out that it was possible, though the whole launch was quite difficult because it was very difficult to mill. So we had postponings of production for more than a month eventually because it was so difficult to find out. But it is eventually CNC milled, and the shape is exactly the same as intended. But because of milling, and this is an important part versus CNC versus printing, because of milling, we could drop the retail price with 1.5 thousand euros, excluding that. So that's massive. And then it was a no-brainer to say, okay, we're going to make the base model with CNC because it's our whole language is about the shape and the sculpture and not about the process. So the process should be best fitting with the design. And I'll tell you a little bit about why this price difference is so high. Because printing in the first place is metal printing is a high-end technique. So the technique is very expensive. And then you've seen also how coarse it is. So you don't get the exact fittings for the crystal and the movements, etc., inside of the end product. So every case after printing needs to be checked in size because there's differentiation in each specific outcome. Then it has to be calibrated individually into a CNC machine to actually mill the fittings inside. And this is a very time-consuming thing you need to do for every single piece. And then after that, you need to finish it by hand. So it takes much more time and efforts to create into a finished product. So this is the complexity of 3D printing. Having said this base model, so to say, CNC version, we also said, okay, but it gives actually the ground the opportunity to do a special edition, which is limited in numbers because the process is so difficult that we can say, okay, we then limit ourselves for the sake of complexity to a series, so to a specific number, and that will actually be 3D printed. And that's a special branch within the signature line. So we call it the lab series, and lab because it's our laboratorium. So this model will always be very experimental. And for the first edition, we took the inspiration from our previous bronze watch, where we developed the dial, which is patinated with copper patina. And the dials are made in house also. So there's more experiment and development behind such a model. And then also you could say, okay, we make the same shape of the signature, but then we hollow it out to extreme. So these lines, this is a rather big magnification, but the lines within the lux are well, if you see from the front, 0.7 millimeters wide. But then also the section of each line is not a square. So it actually is not 0.7 by 0.7, but it's half of that amount of mass which goes in. So it's extremely thin. And I think it's such a thin structure has never been done before. And there it comes in with added value of the 3D printing because you can make these exceptional shapes, and the watch becomes also super light. And then the only material obviously is titanium, because otherwise it's not strong enough. So then the second branch, and I'm almost finished. I took too long already. Horology. We ventured into this direction with our Deconstructed, which we launched last year. This is all about in-house developments, manufacturing in-house, and a lot of hand finishing. So this on the left, for example, is a nice example. It's the dial of the Deconstructed, which consists out of 25 elements, and they're all finished by hand with anglage and then stacked on top of each other. So there's a lot of time which goes into that. And if we say, okay, we have the Horology line and we make maybe only 20 per year, then we have the time also. So that's Deconstructed. The bracelet that we made, so there's a lot of space for in the whole idea of Horology is total creativity without like art, basically, without concession. So meaning that we can experiment a lot. Okay, final chapter, Ornament Nouveau. This is something we just announced and I can't fully expose. It will have a 3D printed case, which is more organic than ever. And this is the sketch that I made in 2017 already from this model, which is telling something about the dream and the whole motivation, because why we are doing this. And I could explain best by calling it integration of all components. So integration of design, that means that all components, including the movement, have to be developed. Like we have to have impact on that. Otherwise, it will never be a whole story, like a wholesome concept. So this is very important. The final product, the final watch, the final movement will look very different than in this sketch, but it shows the ambition that was already set in 2007. So thank you very much for that. I will stop the presentation and I will take the chance to walk through the atelier. But maybe there are already questions.
Mikkel, look, thanks so much for the presentation. That was really useful. You actually touched on so many points, which I'm sure a lot of people will have questions about. But why don't we do the tour first before getting to questions? Because that would be, I think, useful.
Okay, I will make a flip now to my phone and use the phone for walking through the atelier.
Sure.
So I hope you can see me.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is I'm walking to the front now. Actually, I will flip the camera. Why doesn't it do that? Yes. Okay. So Delft, old town in the Netherlands. Maybe Samuel will know. And this is the atelier in an overview. So basically our temporary office, because we're in 125 square meters here, and it's very cramped. So we're actually going to move this summer, but we have to look through it. Our temporary office, the watches, which we can discuss at a later moment. These are some objects which will belong to the ornament 2 or ornament nouveau, and I can use for explaining the 3D printing also. You can see that these are printed like these with the old school technique, and then the supports, they need to be removed afterwards. So quite a lot of work. Then we have the workbenches and some machines. So milling machine, which we use for all kinds of things, but among that is snailing of the ratchet wheels. These workbenches are used solely for finishing. Finishing of cases and anglage, and these are personal benches. So this is Puck bench. Puck was one of the first 6 to join. This is Damian's bench. And you can see that Damian is now working on some holders for ornament nouveau, so that we can finish each component actually of the movement very precisely underneath the microscope. And this is my bench. And here you can actually see that, well, I'm working on, I don't know if it's sharp, but I'm working on one of the movement components, and you can see how it goes. So you really work with underneath the microscope, sometimes up to 40 times magnification. Then we have the guard dog, the couch for the guard dog. That's Thomas. And these are very old school machines that we use on a daily basis. So that's actually nice. All the machines that we that are here are actually used on a daily basis. And this is my favorite, which is a relatively large lathe. We can work very precise with it, but also do case finishing, for example, on it. This is an old pantograph from Deco, which we used for milling bridges. So maybe you've seen Oscillon, a brand who makes whole movements conventionally with, they actually make the bridges with such a machine. We have galvanic plating in the back, and there's a back room which I will not show because it's a terrible mess, where we have a small CNC milling machine and a laser etching machine. And laser etching is a fiber laser which we calibrated up to a precision of 0.002 of a millimeter. This I wanted to show you because these are some parts from the signature ornament. So you see that the shape is actually on the case back. This allows me to make a very hollow side, but it also allows us to finish the lugs more precisely because you have more space to move around it. As you can see, it's quite a difficult shape to finish because it's a double curve. So that's done by hand. Here you can see start of ornament nouveau. I could already show this to you because this is in the sketch already visible. And what I found important is that if you compare signature ornament, which is our main line, so to say, with Ornament Nouveau. I hope you can see that there's a clear, a clear design language which really works together. So then we have the watchmaking terrarium. We call it terrarium. That's the watchmaker sweatshop. The sketch we just published online, which is on the roof, to remind us constantly of the ambition that we have. And this is my bench, which is a terrible mess. And that is because I'm assembling, doing the first test of assembling the new movement. So this actually is the Ornament Nouveau movement, which is fully in-house. And it needs a lot of small components. So everything needs to be adjusted by hand before it can be fit. And then also the jewels, etc., need to be in the right place. So that's a lot of work. And you can see that I use all kinds of reamers, etc., to make this the holes and correct the holes. Sometimes buff and file some specific parts. So it looks like a mess, but I actually know exactly where everything is laying, and I think this makes I'm actually proud to show you, because it makes a difference with, for example, the clean ateliers you see in Switzerland sometimes, whereas every component comes and is completely directly fitting because it's already made for 10,000 years, for example. This really is handcrafting and hand building. So this is the other bench where I'm doing recording now at the moment, and this is the pad printer. We actually have two. We use this one for 5 years, which is from 1900 basically. So this is a very rare, piece of beauty, I think. Tell you something about pad printing. So this is to print the text and the letterings on the dials. So you have a cliché which is coming over there, which is a metal plate where the texture or the design is etched into. You have a pad. You take it from the cliché and you move it to the dial. So these need to be very precisely aligned. So you can adjust both, and then you can print the dial. Nicest thing is to print, for example, at minimum 3 times, so you have a thick layer of ink. Very beautiful object, but difficult to use because every cliché, every dial needs to be manually aligned, and therefore that's, I think, interesting about how we look towards our tools, but also our watches. We made a new pad printer. Actually, Barry is our technical developer. He used to build whole factories and machines. And when he sees such an old school thing, he likes it, but it's not working correctly. So he then builds new tools which are very quick change and always aligned. So it's exactly the same idea. So this is something we are thinking about, maybe even constructing for other makers also. So if you're interested, reach out. I wanted to finally, or almost finally, show you a little bit about the bronze dial. So every dial that we used to make in the past, almost all were bespoke. And for every dial, we make a copy for our own archive. So if I look in white rhodium, there's a lot of dials. Pale gold. Every dial has a second, and maybe this one you will recognize, even with the hand. It's from for Hassan, Arab Watch Guide. So these are to show, to archive our experiments and to archive our processes. And the bronze dial turned out to be quite a difficult development. And here you can see roughly how it's made. So we use a plate of copper, which we cut and etch. And then the ring is almost etched, almost cut out. So after the process, we can actually pop it out of the frame. And then you get something which is something like that. And then we have the following process of grinding down the numerals, making the recess in the subdial, and pad printing. So this is for the first experiments. We made 3 watches and 3 dials, and we thought, okay, we know how it works. And then we had to do the serial production, and then it turned out to be very difficult to get it constant and even. So we had one guy working half a year full time to actually develop this. And this is also a reason why we're proud of it, of course, but also a reason why we thought, okay, let's use it in our lab series, because it's so unique. Switching to the signature ornament. I just showed you this on the group. I hope it's somewhat visible. This is the first mock-up. So it's not functional and it's not screwed together, but the first mock-up of the glass dial that we're also offering. So this will come in 4 colors, from pale gold to rose gold to white rhodium and black rhodium, metal, and hopefully you can see the effect of the dial. It's a metal base which is galvanized, and then sapphire on top, double domed, and then the printing, and then you see an indice ring. So the whole idea is to emphasize the shape of the lugs, etc., to create a lot of depth in the inside of the watch. Yeah, I think that was a little bit in a nutshell, and I think I'm going to move to the front of the atelier and sit down, so I can take the watches if people have questions. I hope this works.
Thanks, Mikkel. That was actually awesome, getting behind the scenes footage. I mean, you've saved us all a trip now. So
you're very welcome, though.
Thank you, thank you. No, it's actually great to see it. I mean, it is quite a cramped space. I'm surprised. You know, that you said there was 7, right, in the team? Yeah,
we have. I think in terms of FTEs, it's 5.5. So not everybody works full time, which is a blessing at the moment. But we're so it's not official or signed yet, but we're looking into a space which is like massively bigger, and if that goes well, then we have more than sufficient space, and we're actually thinking of creating some kind of horology hub in the Netherlands, where we can have a watch bar, because it will be a very safe space. And the ambition is to realize a bar, a meeting spot, and maybe even a space where we can teach people for courses. Like, I'm thinking of doing local courses in Anglash, for example, because now we have to import that from Switzerland. And maybe some watchmaking courses, or work together with the school, and creating also an overview about the history of timekeeping in the Netherlands, which is fascinating, because not many people in the Netherlands know Huygens, but he used to live 15 kilometers from here. And well, with the pendulum, he invented did one of the most important inventions in the industry. And now, talking about the escapements, we also have in Delft a company called Flexus, which is making silicon escapements, and which actually holds most of the patents into that. So it's also based in Delft. So they used to work with Lucien Nardin and many other companies, and nobody knows about it. So that should be exposed. Yeah.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, look, that's quite pioneering in itself, and I think you know, the work you're doing, particularly with 3D printing as well. You were one of the earlier brands that certainly caught my attention, anyway. And the way you're using it is more refined. I mean, the design, you know, the architectural elements that you've discussed. I hadn't appreciated just how narrow the gap was in the lugs that you had showed as well. So that's it just goes to show the small detail. So look, that's great, and I wish you luck with the new premises. That sounds really exciting. And
thank you.
You know, if you open it up, we want a party, please. So
well, that's we will, if everything goes well, we will host a big party. And the good thing is there's hotel in the same complex, so you can stay overnight.
Excellent, excellent. We've got some questions, by the way, that have just popped up on the message. Do you mind me if I ask you questions now, or do you want to
Yeah, of
show?
course. No, let's start.
Okay, so I'll just start from the top. Does 3D printing allow you to achieve the greatest design for sound amplification? Are you looking into sound complications?
I'm not completely sure if I understand sound to
Sound amplification. Are you looking into sound complications? It sounds to me as if perhaps this is referring to some sort of a chiming movement.
yeah, I
Perhaps.
think so too.
Um, uh,
I can imagine that if you open up the inside of a watch and you create some kind of a how do you say, echo room. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but you can actually play with it. I've not yet thought about that, to be honest, but it's an interesting idea. It's a very interesting idea.
Next question. What is the texture of the how is the texture of the signature dial achieved?
Yeah. So we have three dials. I think the person asking that is referring to the lab series, but I will tell about all three. So the first one is the sapphire dial, which has a metal plate I just showed to you. So that's mainly sapphire, very smooth. The second one is ceramics, which is very referring to the Delft pottery tradition, which is quite famous worldwide. Although interesting, this I tried having it made in Delft, though we couldn't get thin enough. So whereas Delft is Delft is originally stolen from Chinese porcelain, Delft pottery, like 4,500 years ago. I now had to move to a Chinese specialist to create the dials. So we're actually re-looping the whole idea. Okay. So that's ceramics, and then the signature lab series, which is this one. I think the person asking is referring to. This is a copper oxidization. So the dial is first milled out of metal three-dimensionally, because the front and the back has to be dome shaped, otherwise it will not fit onto the movement within the case, because the bezel is quite low. I don't know if you can see it quite well, but you see it's doming back, and that allowed us to create a smaller side profile, like lower side profile, which I think is very elegant. So that's milled. Then the lines on the side, which is like a sunburst, that's carved into it. So we carved the lines from the center in an uneven pattern. And then we sandblast the whole surface. And sandblasting is needed to create a rougher texture so that the oxidization will grip firmly. And then it's processed 3 times through a controlled oxidization, which is basically done by electrolysis. Using a salt bath. And then hanging it on a specific voltage and a specific time, and then drying it also in a specific temperature, and then brushing off the material, and that 3 times it builds up a very strong layer, which doesn't fall off, and that's of course important. Yeah, and then basically that's that. So eventually, of course, the signature is pad printed onto that, but.
Is that a similar technique with the solid bronze watch that you had with the
yes,
copper to the okay, and did you deliberately do that patina effect more on the outside of the dial, or did it just happen to be like that?
Well, we know by now that if you create carvings more deep and intense towards the side, that there will be more space to literally build up the patina in the carvings. So the effect will be more intense on the outside circumference. Sorry for my English. But we also control it a little bit by brushing more than the center. So it's every die will be slightly different because of this. But we know to a certain extent that where the patina will build up and how it will build up. And this is exactly what we desired, that it really radiates towards the sides.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you. Do you see 3D printing reaching a point where it will be able to achieve the necessary tolerance to reduce the manual work and adjustments needed to assemble the watches?
Oh, yes and no. That's a question I got many times, and also in the beginning when I started with this technique, I thought it would be super nice if I could 3D print the parts of the movement also. Okay, so over time we shifted from selective laser melting with the supports to metal binder jetting, which is basically metal powder melted together with some kind of glue, you could say, if I say it easily, which is then sintered in an oven, and the glue melts out and the metal melts together. If I put it very simple. So the effect is that in the oven it shrinks 20%, which creates much more refined textures. The downside, though, is that the shrinkage is not 100% constant. So that means that one could be 21% and one could be 19%. So there's a lot of fallout. And even when you talk about very, well, case tolerances are 100th of a millimeter, or 500, like I think our tightest tolerances on the cases are 300ths of a millimeter, but that's not achievable with printing at this moment. If you talk about a movement, you have some specifics which are, well, ideally 2/1000th of a millimeter. So this is by far not achievable at this moment if you want to have a ready product from the printer. So you always need post-processing for the time being. I do see multiple techniques popping up also with like some micro printing with supports. And I have to say that support printing, so selective laser melting, is more precise and more constant than metal binder jetting. But there's restrictions, and that is that the supports have to be positioned in ways that the heat gets out of the material. So you are limited in shape. So my preferred option now is metal binder jetting with all the negatives of that. So I think that it will become more precise, but it will have a very long route. And I think the future is to be very aware of that and actually combine, also in your facilities, combine printing and post-processing always in a very smart way. And that I think will be the future.
It could be quite cost prohibitive, I think, to speed up developments in the industry, because these printers, I mean, they cost what, I think what, $1 million or something to have one.
The printers we're using right now. So this also not why you don't of the reason why you don't see it in our atelier and why I would never invest in it if I had the money. But they are 7,500,000 euros, and so that's an incredible amount of money for a technique which is rapidly evolving. So the first printers we were printing on were just over 500,000, and within 2 years I switched to a different technique. So imagine that you invested in such a machine, and you see other companies bringing out more modern techniques. So if I were to talk for myself, I will always use it as a design tool first and make sure that we get the post-processing right. So, and that means that you fully need to understand the printing and the limitations of the printing, so to make the optimal design also for the post-processing.
Yeah, noted. Thank you for that. Next question. How many hours does it take to put the whole watch together from the lab series from start to finish?
Okay, good. That's also a good question. I have to say that I know it roughly, but I didn't time it yet very precisely. I will speak a little bit about the ornament one and the raw ornament first, because we did a very precise analysis early last year. That's and the most simple watch took 85 hours, and that's the amount of time to finish the case, to finish the movement, to make the dial, put it together. So that's not the time from external providers, for example. So the lab series, we saved a lot of time because we swifted to a manufacturer in the Netherlands who is printing, but also doing the post-processing. So they actually take over a piece, part of the quality control, and deliver a semi-finished product, which we need to finish by hand. But that's for the brushing and the contrast finishes. So the geometry is there. It saves a tremendous amount of time.
You can imagine. Yeah.
I cannot fully say how long it takes per watch exactly, because we need to time the whole process again, including the dial making, because the dial is a different shape and it actually takes more work than the previous bronze dial. But it's less than half of our first series. And this is crucial because that means that we can scale more. And then the CNC version is in terms of finishing, it takes so this version takes some grinding first, because there's lines from the CNC machine that takes some grinding, then sandblasting, and then selective brushing. But that could already be done for the case within 4 hours. So that's really tremendous decline of time, or the decrease of time. And then assembly, it will hopefully we can build one watch in one day. That's the aim for that particular model, because one very important aspect is that if we drop the production time and we drop the pressure on our capacity, hopefully we can also decrease the waiting time. So for the first buyers, we said 3 to 4 months, and that's basically because we're starting up production. So we need to bridge that time. But eventually, it's my goal, our goal as a team, to have watches, well, maybe even available for purchase directly. So because it's so annoying in this industry that you have to wait for such a long time for a watch. And I hope we can, with our signature lines, we can decrease that.
Mm. Well, trust me, 3-4 months is nothing compared to some of the waiting times I've heard of our members suffering from other brands. Well, I will not mention names, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. So you know.
Well, this is not relevant for our Horology line, which will take much longer. But
no, of course, but that's a bespoke. I mean, that's a totally bespoke piece. So that's a different thing. Very good. Okay. Another question. Well, there's a few more actually. Do you go through a process of destructive or non-destructive testing to assess the quality and robustness of your cases?
Ah, good. Yeah.
In other words, do you beat the hell out of your cases to see how hard they are?
Yeah. Well, in prototyping phase, not for production. So we don't do it with the watches that are actually for customers. But for the especially for the 3D printing, in the first watches that we made, I said because I was still a one-man show at the time. I worked with Materialize, big Belgium firm. And this is also why I'm independent, but I'm not against working with suppliers who are very knowledgeable, for the sake of their testing and quality control. So the first watches that we created gone through very tough pressure tests and also density tests, so that we knew exactly what the capacities of the technique were. By now, the production of a prototype is slightly different, because I now know what's the boundary, so to say, in terms of density, solidity. And now for me, it's more about creating thinness and creating this Calatrava, like, I don't know if you know Calatrava, but otherwise check him out. This Calatrava, like, very thin architecture. And that needs to be tested, and it's testing by dropping, but also testing by actually wearing. I think important to say is that because we got the question also about from a potential client about the lab series, if it could be taken to the gym, for example. I think that it is a fully functional watch, so that's the main thing. It should function, but it's not a tool watch. So yeah, I think that's important. So you can buy the signature CNC version, which is more tough because it literally has more mass and more rigidity. Rigidity, is that a word? But these lines, although extremely strong, well, we literally did bending tests on pressure, etc., and you see that it bends and then it bends back. But yeah, if a car runs over it, it will be deformed, for example. So yeah, that is a thin line. Better not use it during intense sports, for example.
You mentioned the lugs have some flex, so this is actually related to the next question. I think you've just answered it, but if there's flex, so does that mean structurally they're unlikely to break off? They would just rather bend rather than break?
Yeah. That's the then also it's about, if you run over it with a car, it will be so deformed you can't get it back. But in normal harsh wear, I'll try not to get run over by a car. Nice, Chris. but sorry, that's really funny. But indeed, when it gets like, for example, it gets pulled on the bracelet, it will wink, like, I don't know if that's a word. It will form like this and then shape back again, and that's because it's titanium. But the titanium gives this toughness to the material, whereas we can make these thin lines, but this model can never be made in any other material. That's very clear.
Okay. Some questions about dials coming in now. So do you have any other dials for upcoming watches? Do you have something planned? You know, I don't think you as a brand talk about your dials enough, actually, because everyone knows you as sort of, you know, the 3D printing pioneer and, you know, these beautiful architectural designs. But actually your dial work, considering it's all made in-house, I don't think that gets talked about enough. So I'd love to know the answer to this as well. Do you have something new and different coming out?
I'd like to discuss this comment also, because I might think you're right. The reason I think, well, it doesn't stand out that much is that there are more. A dial is more a conventional thing to make, maybe. I'm not sure. Although the way how we make it, I think we try to be original in that way, because that's also one way to set it apart from other offerings on the market. Yeah, do we have other plans? We have many plans, but I think about this signature line. I think what is so it's funny, you see people watching in the interior on the outside. But I think important to mention on this particular model is that with the signature lines, the Delft Blue is intended to stay for a long time. And the sapphire dials are intended to stay for a very long time. That's why they are more traditional in a way. So they are not traditional in how they are made, but they are traditional by using brigand numerals, which is our own font, brigand, actually, and also a more abstract layout on the glass dials. So to be timeless, so to say. The Lab series is more experimental and might be earlier, like a subject to change more easily. what I would like to see is that we create these lab series or the signature series together with people over time. So it is practically impossible to make a bespoke watch for €3,500, which is the entry price. But we really strive to make this a very small series limited edition possibility. So like say 5 to 10, maybe 20 pieces, more if more is always an option. But so the whole idea of the watch is that it's adaptable. And I would like to see us work together with groups or with clients later on to see, okay, what is a way to actually create a new design together. The lab series could be a bespoke watch for a single client, though I am now holding back to that kind of requests because we simply don't have the capacity. So it's perfectly suitable for that, actually. But yeah, I have to be very, very sparse. Is that a word? Like very careful with the amount of time that we spend. And my idea behind the signature is that it's first of all a model which will set our design language and make the brands familiar, like people familiar with the brand. Internally, we actually call it the brand builder. So that's the first step, and then later on we can see how we can do it. It is intended to be adaptable, and we can even, and that's also an idea and something we will do in the near future. We can even adapt movement up to 30 millimeters. So we could also include, for example, a Fauché micro rotor, chronograph. Even we've adapted it to adapt to multiple heights and multiple diameters.
Earlier in your presentation, sorry to cut you off, you mentioned that the design is scalable. So is this also another term for the modular system that you've introduced into? So this is what you mean by scalable. It's effectively a modular design, and you can incorporate different movements and therefore different dials.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, interesting. Okay. I have a follow-up question to the one earlier. This was about the signature model for the sparkly effect of the metal dial. How is that achieved effectively?
I like that question. So the sparkling effect is very important in that dial, super important. And it is something which is derived from our raw ornament models, where we started making the dials from metal blanks, and then frosted it. And frosted is a very nice word you read a lot in the industry, but it's basically bead blasting. But the specific bead you're using and the specific pressure you're using is very important there. So we use a ceramic bead, which is super hard, and it creates a very beautiful glittering effect in direct sunlight. Like I will try to see if I can put the new dial in because there's sun now. I'll see actually we'll see directly if that's possible and if we can see the effect. So and then it's about the galvanic plating. If it's done well, it will keep the glittering effect. So let me see. I need to change. Yeah. So yeah, I hope this somewhat works. I'm not sure.
Can you get a bit closer? Yeah, it's coming out now.
So this is, I think, the main objective for this specific dial. That it becomes very lively in sunlight, and I think it adds to the depth of the watch, and also making it more interesting. But the reason why we started experimenting with these textures is that the change to Horologerie Bru actually. So the cases, they are part of the printing or finishing of the cases is that we sandblast after pre-finishing. So we use emery sticks from let's say 280 up until 2000 before polishing. So you emery actually the shape, you correct the shape, and then bead blasting is used to give it its final texture, but also to take off some loose parts which could be still off on the semi-finished product. And that gives this beautiful texture. And the swift towards finishing the dial was actually to see, hey, okay, what if we copy that texture into the other components of the watch, being the dial and the movement. And then if we do a polished ring around the subdial, you get the contrast with which is also in the case, for example. So this is how that came to existence. And it's still accurate in this model.
Very nice. Look, sorry to trouble you going and getting it and showing us, but that
No problem. No, it's with pleasure.
That dial, I think the same person said, beautiful dial, thanks a lot for the answer. The dial is the real hero of the signature model. So
thank you very much.
I think
I have to say that I put this one very fast. That's why it's not functional, but put it very fastly together because this is an interesting thing. This dial we actually wanted to have made by a dial maker. And just like the case, it turned out to be extremely difficult, apparently, to make. So the samples we got were totally not what we wanted. So we now made it ourselves, but using a custom-made sapphire. So we can actually create exactly what we want. And the idea is then to communicate with the dial maker to help us out, because we can't make all the dials ourselves. That's against the concept of the model. But I just put it together literally I think a quarter of an hour before we spoke, and I thought, shit, this might be the best model out of the line. But yeah, I was happy.
Well, no, we're grateful. We're grateful. Thank you. We have a couple more questions, and I'm just conscious of your time, so maybe we'll fly through these ones before wrapping up. If more companies are doing 3D cases, how would you consider yourself standing out from the competition?
Okay, that's a very good question. Because I hope
your design, right?
Yes, exactly. So this is something where in the Morning Round podcast, which will I think will be released on Wednesday, I said something about the industry and also about how I think, and in the atelier it's a common thought, that the industry will change in the coming months to years, and it's already in process, and that we think that the market will get tougher. Meaning, I think that the market is overflooded with watchmakers and watch brands and a lot of ugly shit, to be honest. And that's an opinion, but I think there will be some kind of survival of the fittest, where originality will stand out, will have to stand out. So process of making and quality obviously quality is very important, but then how do you stand out? It's always by design. And I've seen 3D printed cases coming and going, and obviously it's a very difficult technique still. So if the design is not good enough, it's not worth to use it. Because it's not worth the pain, it will not be an added value to a customer. So I have to be totally crucial, of like, oh no, not crucial, but totally brutal to myself also. If it doesn't sell, apparently we're not doing something good. So that's I think the honesty of the market. So if others will venture, I think it will be a good thing, because there will be like it's very good to have competition, and it will actually drive creativity, and it will drive the technique to higher standards.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Final question before we wrap up, and I think you've touched on this earlier, but again, I'm curious to have the answer as well, because you've always talked about wanting to do a totally in-house movement. Even back from the previous series, you were using the ETA 7001, I believe, and then you did a modified Celita, and now you're in a position where you can. And we just saw snippets of you sort of assembling your own movement. But do you have plans for different complications as well as just doing your own in-house movements? I mean, you mentioned a modular system, so I'm sure you've got plans for other complications.
I'm doubting what I should say or not, but
just say what you're comfortable with. I don't want to put you on the spot.
First thing is first thing first thing is to start with an integrated design. The architect hanging over there is the same image as I showed in the presentation from Horta. Horta did actually also design the clothing of his wife so that would fit the furniture and the exterior of the building. So that's crazy integration. But eventually, that makes that the whole concept is wholesome. So coming from that perspective, it was always my dream to develop parts of the movement and eventually the whole movement. Because only then, as a designer, you can have full impact of the total outcome of the watch, and eventually create. Hopefully, that's really what I would like that we will achieve, is that it becomes art. And that's very difficult to say, but because that sounds egocentric or whatever. But I think that for me, if I wear a watch, I can't afford them, but I really love what Max Busser is doing. I love the Bethune. I love these high-end independents for their extreme creativity. And not every watch is beautiful, but every watch is creative. Every watch is searching for boundaries and breaking them, and then it can become art if it's done well. So integration of aspect is very important. Then, of course, I was a student. I couldn't. I funded the whole company from selling my vintage pieces, which I restored over time. And I had to choose a movement to start from because I didn't have the knowledge, neither the money to do more than that. And the Passeur was the thinnest movement on the market, which allowed me to create a more stylish design. So that's also important. It should always be flat and stylish, in my opinion, classical. 50 years ago and in 50 years. So design, integration, and beauty is for me more important than complication. So over time, we will integrate complications which are actually adding to the aesthetics of the whole creation. So technically and aesthetically. So I can imagine that I like very simple complications. Like, it's very practical to have a power reserve indicator, for example. But it can be super aesthetical. Look at the time pyramid from Arnold and Son. They have two power indicators. They're so nicely done. That's also fascinating because that very movement is based on the 7001 architecture. But that aside. So yes, complications, but not for the sake of the complication. So, and that also comes in line with where I think that we are as a maker. I have to be very humble. I started only in 2016 officially. Now, since 2020, we're a team, but we don't have years, like many years of experience. So we need to develop our own technical skills. And I think in line with that, we have to evolve our design or evolve that into our design language. So it will start very subtle. But one of the things that we are dreaming about and is working with the escapement. Can be, well, I mentioned already flexes, can be something we will do with them together, which is unique in the independent scene. Or maybe over time a beautiful flying tourbillon, because it's a flying tourbillon is a spacious thing, which is totally in line with the design language. So those kinds of aspects I'm dreaming about. One of the two will actually start development still this year. I'm not telling which. But for the sake of aesthetics and being very realistic about where we are as a maker.
There was a glint in your eye when you said flying tourbillon, so I'm assuming maybe that one. And I always thought about a tourbillon in the deconstructed
Me too.
open dial. It's yeah, okay, we're okay, enough said then. Look, thank you so much for your time, guys. I know there's a few more questions, but I'm just conscious of everybody's time. So look, you can always direct questions within the MIC group directly to Mikkel. Mikkel, I just want to thank you very much again for the opportunity, your time. I mean, this went on longer than I expected, actually, which is great. Which is great. So look, I've got one final question, which might make you laugh, actually. But in looking up some of your earlier videos and some of the earlier sort of promotion for the brand, when you had less hair, obviously, then
yeah,
you were wearing,
I knew this was coming.
You were wearing your first, I think, your very first beautiful watch, and you got into a very old Peugeot. And I'm wondering, is the car still around, or have you got rid of it?
Oh fuck! I love that question. So that's a bit of that's a dramatical question.
Oh dear, have I hit an emotional note? Oh god.
Yeah. This was that was the best car I ever driven. Actually, that one was 1972, and it had independent suspension all around, the like superb comfort, like really good car. But yeah, I wrecked it. So what happened is I that was the first car I had, and my father restores old French cars from let's say pre-war to 1970s. So I was raised with the 504, and my father is a guy who well, he built one car, a Peugeot 404 Cabriolet, the convertible, completely out of stainless steel. So he's a crazy guy. So I basically got raised with that. So my first car, we restored it together, and but I was not an experienced driver, and there were very shitty tires. So you can already notice we're in a very wet country. I had terrible aquaplaning when I was passing a truck in a corner on the highway, and I lost control. I first ran into the car and then into the side of the road.
Oh, Mikkel, I think I've lost you.
I said, "What the fuck are you saying? You'll drive it?" And he actually started the engine. It started straight away. And although the front was completely loose and no radiator, etc., it drove onto the driveway, and so that was literally the best car I ever had. But the first money I gained, I sold. In the beginning of your company, you're not always doing everything by the book. So I sold 2 watches to one person, and I bought my green milling machine I showed you, and I bought in France a 504 coupe, which is in my opinion, one of the most beautiful designs ever made. It's a design by Pininfarina. It has a curve which is just, that's so beautiful. And this is a car which is in restoration, so I hope to be able to drive it next year. But I'm an extreme car lover in the atelier. Damian shares the same passion. We also Rens, our financial guy, where we have a group app about cars and we do trips, etc. So yeah. Well, actually, this is important. If people are going to Geneva Watch Days this year, we will actually plan a rally tour because we love cars. So I will probably be driving the cheapest car around, but with a big smile on my face. And if anyone is planning to go to Geneva Watch Days and is willing to attend, send us a DM because it will be fun. We will do, I think, an afternoon driving through the mountains near Geneva, and we will end somewhere at a restaurant with fondue or something, and we will have a very enjoyable day. And we plan to create a rally edition of the signature also to accompany it. So
that sounds fantastic. It's in August, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's in August, right?
Yes. So Geneva Watch Day is the last days of August and first days of September. So we it's not settled yet, but we plan to do the rally on the 28th, which is the day before Geneva Watch Days. Cool.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, thank you. MIC members heard it here first. So if you want to go rally driving, that's brilliant. Look, thank you, Mikkel. Again, thank you so much for your time. I want to thank all the members who stayed online as well. It was great hearing from you. Great to see the shop. Great to see you on a personal level as well. It was great. So look, we'll keep in touch, and I'll drop you a note later on. So we'll discuss a few things.
Yes, I thank everybody for their questions and your time. And Omar, I'd like to thank MIC for this opportunity. And I think talking something about this is, I think this is a potential big hit for a platform like MIC. I think if more makers are sharing their background in hopefully an honest and transparent way, then I think this can become very big.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Have a good evening.
All the best. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
And you. Take care, guys. Thanks all.